Let's hear from one of the experts. Sam Amick, our friend from The Athletic, joins us for the first time here on the Nick Cattle Show, Sports 1140 KHTK. Of course, you can hear Sam every single week on the morning show with Dave and Jason. Sam, thank you for the time. It is much appreciated. How much sense does the Mike Brown hire make to you?
Nick, thanks for having me. I appreciate you. It makes a lot of sense in a vacuum, and I only say that to kind of admit that in terms of Mike as a coach and as a person, I give a big thumbs up. He's got respect around the league. I feel like he's in a good place. He's got all this experience as a head coach from the old days with young LeBron James and the late, great Kobe Bryant with the Lakers. But he's done a lot of good work in the last 5-6 years, not only with the Warriors, but head of the Nigerian national team and things of this nature. If I'm being honest, I do have to admit that I told some folks, close to the situation today, like this whole trend of, Vivek Ranadive and always plucking from the Warriors program. I think the optics of that are not ideal. But at the end of the day, Mike's a good coach and a guy that, should be up for a job like this. And I think is going to give him a good presence in that role.
We'll get to Vivek in a minute because obviously a lot of talk about him and ownership leading up to this decision. But, Sam, why was it Mike Brown over Steve Clifford and Mark Jackson at the end of the day?
So I don't have total clarity to, still learning about the interview process. I do know that, Mike made an extremely good impression on Vivek. And like you said, we'll get to Vivek in a minute, but that mattered a lot because, and Nick, hopefully you can still hear me okay, brother. The dance team just...
No, I got you. Yeah, you sound good. You sound good.
All right. So it's, you had history between Wes Wilcox, the Kings assistant GM, kind of the right-hand man with Monte McNair, worked with Mike in Cleveland, and you had history and a rapport there. And so there was a less of a getting to know you period, although with Monte, that mattered a lot because Mike and Monte did not know each other. So makes a good impression on Monte, and then meets with Vivek at his home, I believe, in the Bay, and leaves a good impression there. And then, as Vivek ends up choosing to go to that Warriors game on Saturday night, and now it looks like he just wanted one last front row look at Mike and kind of the way he carries himself. But the defense first mentality obviously mattered for all of these candidates. Beyond that, I think it really is just a case of making an impact in the interview process, and obviously Mike did that.
Sam Amick is with us here on the Nick Cattle Show on this Monday, Sports 1140 KHTK. Sam, lots of talk about Vivek and Mark Jackson. It was painted in some reports, some of the narrative was, if Jackson was the hire, it would have been Vivek making that hire. Do you think that would have been accurate?
I think it's just hard to not. I guess I would start even earlier than that and say that, if Vivek wasn't very influential, I don't see Mark being part of the process at that stage. If anybody doesn't know, not only did you have the connection between Vivek and Mark from the Warriors days, where Mark was the head coach back when Vivek was a minority owner, and we all know how kind of fixated and kind of enamored with that team in that era he was. But even after that, when the Kings had fired Michael Malone, I think it was, make sure I get this information right, and they were figuring out what to do next. This is the Ty Corbin short-term tenure. They brought Mark in to actually meet with DeMarcus Cousins at the time, Chris Mullin, Pete D'Alessandro, and Vivek, kind of like to have their franchise player connect with Mark and maybe, conceivably have him be the head coach instead of what ended up being George Karl. So you had this history where Vivek had already shown interest, and I know for a fact Mark had some rapport and relationship with Vivek. So all of which is to say that, to me, if it's a different owner running these things and running this search, rather, I don't think Mark would be in it. I think Vivek was the driving force behind that.
Sam, when we looked at Mark Jackson, we talked a lot about the friction that he had caused towards the tail end of that Golden State tenure he had. Do you think some of that was overplayed, or do you think that was an accurate description of what went down out there in Golden State and, the questionable cultural fit that Jackson would have brought here?
It was real from the sense of it was very divisive at the end. I don't actually think it was all Mark's fault. In fact, and I've said this before, one subplot that does always not sit well with me because I don't think it was covered the way it should have been covered, but even including by myself, is, we always seem to forget that Mark got, illegally taped by one of his assistant coaches, who's now with the Knicks, Darren Erman, during a time when it seemed as if somebody had kind of incentivized Darren to figure out what Mark was saying privately. And so the allegation was that he was, talking sideways about certain people and whatnot. But that's I'm not a lawyer, but that's an illegal act that in that instance, Mark was the one kind of being wrong. And so stuff happened in both directions. On the flip side of that, Mark had gotten sideways with the front office, had some players in the locker room that did not take kindly to, the way that he brought religion into the locker room. I will say, in my opinion, that was in the minority, because you had a lot of players, Steph, Andre Iguodala, guys like that very, spiritual, religious guys who welcomed it. So, it was all real, and I'll never forget the night that I think was his last game when the Warriors lost to the Clippers in the playoffs. Mark, I guess just in case he lost the game, knew that it might be his last game, and he wore an all-black suit as if it was his funeral on the job. And sure enough, it was. So, I mean, it was dramatic, and it was messy. We know that Joe Lacob had made comments at a season ticket holder event, I think, about how many people didn't get along with Mark. But I think over time, you got to realize that, like, it's got to get back to the basketball at some point, and he did play a huge part in that group, starting to go in the right direction.
Sam Amick with us here on the Nick Cattle Show, Sports 1140 KHTK. Sam, what's Mike's reputation throughout the league as a head coach?
It's somewhere between, like, I was going to say solid. I don't think that's flattering enough. I think it's better than that. It's just, strong. I mean, first of all, in terms of his coaching pedigree, and this is kind of the era that we live in. Greg Popovich has had a tremendous impact on so many coaches, and Mike Brown is one of them. And Pop is a really, really close mentor of Mike's. And so that is the kind of thing that he's kind of made really good use of over the years. When Mike was in between jobs, he would go do that kind of unofficial spending time with the Spurs thing, where he wasn't really on the books and not even getting paid by the Spurs, but just, soaking up the wisdom of that program and continuing to grow as a coach. So that part of his history, I think, is important. And I think he's a guy who, you're talking about 15 years or so of, since he had his first head coaching job, maybe 17 years. And now the experience of having worked with some of the best players to ever play the game. The LeBron experience was a good one. He and LeBron had a good relationship. The Kobe relationship was a good one. Didn't take the Lakers where, he wanted to take them, but, Lakerland can be a tricky place. So I'm curious to see, how he's different from that. He's always been known as a grinder, like a, film in the middle of the night type of guy. As a lighthearted aside, I'll share that he's also known as we'll see if I don't know if the COVID era might have changed this, because people don't dress as nice as they used to, but he used to map out his suits, like a week in advance and be pretty detailed about, the sartorial side of his profile. A little bit of, I don't know if he's, clinically OCD, but he's got a little bit of that, where he's just very, very detail oriented. And I think that's part of his coaching style as well. So I think he'll have an impact, and I think he's going to be pretty no holds barred with the Kings players. And I think they need that, starting with the Aaron Fox and kind of working your way down from there, just giving them the vision and making sure that they stick to it.
Last one for you, Sam. We got about a minute here. Any word on Monty's contract, and is this a deal? I know there was a report out there saying that if this team doesn't make the playoffs next season, there could be major changes. Is there a feel that Monty's going to get a shot here with Mike Brown longer than a year? Could they be married at the hip?
To my knowledge, married at the hip would indicate, that Monty had 3 more years beyond this season, considering Mike signed a 4-year deal. So I don't think that part would be accurate. I have not nailed down the contract terms. I think in general, terms of just the mood and the vibe, I mean, listen, there was chatter in this offseason that people around the league, not in the Kings house or the Kings building, but chatter about, is Monty in trouble this summer? And that obviously did not come to pass. And he's still there going into this next coming season, and he's going to be there. But in terms of what I would handicap, like I'm not handicapping anything beyond this season. I think the trade with Sabonis and this Fox Sabonis duo they're trying to do, that there's some runway there now for them to go into this next trade deadline and try to keep working on the roster. But I think there's pressure there for sure.
Sam, we thank you for your time. Great stuff as usual, my man, and hopefully we do this again soon. I appreciate it.